Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. This is a video that I'm going to find quite difficult because I want to articulate all the things that are in my head about this sort of thing, and it's absolutely bouncing off some videos that have appeared, as I say, on our little corner of BookTube about children reading, and it's linked to something I wanted to do anyway. I was planning to do a video on being of the generation of digital migrants and how that compares to being a digital native, which is the next generation, my children's generation, and my parents' generation being completely either flummoxed by it or they really had to retune themselves hugely. Because the thing about being a digital migrant in my generation, the Generation X's, is that we were able to see both sides. So we caught the print age, with magazines and books and encyclopedias and libraries and TV and radio, blah blah blah. And now, and we've seen, and obviously we've seen the development of streaming services, of online information, the information technology, the information highway, the everything being done so fast, the globalization of information so that you can find anything out relatively quickly as long as it's there, and how all of these, print has been replaced by some, well, not replaced, well, that has been in some areas, like, so for example, magazines have pretty much been replaced, but books haven't been replaced, but there's this new form of a book that's not exactly threatening it, but could do in time. And these statistics that these other videos have been talking about, where young children aren't reading as much, is what really is the heart of the videos. Is there an issue about reading being less of a thing, and therefore the next generation is not being able to read? So Brian from Bookish massively recommend you look at his video, because he tore apart statistics anyway and said, well, actually, is it really an issue, because they're not actually as alarming as you think they are if you look at it properly. So that's one thing. But this topic comes up all the time because there are people that do argue the case that people are reading less, and it's definitely something that's a little more, it seems to be a reader seems to be a little more of an outsider thing nowadays. It seems to be. I want to contribute to the discussion, but with some of these things I want to say, but also knowing that I've said this sort of thing in the past myself. So I've been a teacher for 13 years, and I've got two children. One's 27 and one is 21. And one of them reads a lot and trained to be an English teacher, and the other one, the 21-year-old, doesn't read fiction, but reads a lot online and is extremely curious, very wise, very intelligent, could argue anyone under the table, and some of my most interesting discussions have been with him. But he doesn't read fiction, he doesn't read books as a leisure activity. So, but I do think that my experience with my students is also important and interesting, because again, by the nature of what teaching is like with the age of 16 to 18 year olds, because I teach 16 to 18 year olds, we often come up with political subjects or political themes or things to discuss, moral things to discuss, and there's a lot of articulate students and articulate critical thinkers and articulate arguers that don't actually read fiction or non-fiction. They don't read books, but they have become, by the time they're 16, 17, 18, they have become these very critical, articulate people. So I think that shouldn't be ignored, because I think presumably, I would have thought, the fear that people have with people reading less is that that reading is essential to producing these clever, articulate people. I mean, I would also argue that I know quite a lot of people, and I've seen and heard and watched a lot of people that are articulate, have read a lot, but are saying the most ridiculously naive or ignorant things. So, it's not always about the books anyway. But then that's another thing I want to get to eventually as well, the fact that there is this sort of generational gap as well. So a couple of things to hit on first. So this article from The Guardian was the thing that initially started Mark from Book Time with Elvis to talk about this subject. And he said that he'd read this article that said that there was a shocking statistic, a shockingly low amount of people that were between the age of 5 and 8 that didn't have access to a book in their house. And thinking about that age, I immediately think I read Dr. Seuss when I was that young, but I didn't read properly. I definitely didn't read until later than that. It was into in my early teens I started reading. And from what I remember, I think that was pretty common amongst my friends as well, that once we got into 11, 12, 13, we started reading for fun. So what does that even say anyway? So I think that's kind of an interesting thing. But I thought I'd start with why I read. So why do I read? Which is linked to another one that Sean D. Standfast and Mark from Book Time with Elvis has done on this subject. And it's not revolutionary, really. It's not particularly groundbreaking. But if I read non-fiction, and I read a hell of a lot of non-fiction in my lead up to doing my degree, and then when I did my degree, and a little way after that, but then I kind of got a bit burned out with that and decided that I was ignoring fiction too much. So I read mostly fiction now, with the occasional non-fiction book. And I do miss it a little bit. I will definitely probably go back into my history books again. Not the ones I've got, but well, I might do, but more history books I would imagine. But my degree was in history, so I had to read a lot of books. And one of the interesting things about doing a history degree, which is not the case if you're just a hobbyist and you read history books for fun, and probably it seems anyone that does it for fun just reads lots of war books and World War II and maybe the Tudors. But when I did my degree, there was a repeated message from the lecturers about historiography, and that's fascinating. The idea that we're always saying that newspapers are biased and that they have a particular political angle, and that's true for historians as well. So to be a critical thinker when you're reading any non-fiction, but especially history books, is something really important, but probably something that people don't really do. They'll buy a history book, assume it's fact, know that they've just gathered all that information in their head, and now they're an expert on that subject. And I think it's really interesting, the fact that critical thinking is probably more important than how much you've read. How much are you critically reading? How much do you believe? How much do you look at other alternative opinions about it? How much have you seen the history of it and the growth of it and the development of it? And how much have you seen a change in people's opinions about it? And is there that development? If I'm reading about the War of the Roses and the book was written in 1920, I'm probably going to think, well, that might not be quite as nuanced by lots of discussion amongst historians and lots of responses to other historians as much as something that might have been written about War of the Roses in 1995. So I do think that's important. So I read a lot of history, I read a lot of philosophy, I've read sort of books about music. Those three categories are probably my most common areas in non-fiction. But in fiction, it's all about storytelling. So storytelling can give you many things. It can give you escapism, it can be fun, and that's absolutely essential anyway. It can also be thought-provoking, so it can start you thinking about something that could be about empathizing with a set of people or set of circumstances that are not part of your life. So that's really important, and I do think there needs more empathy in the world, but I would have thought that 100 years ago. I definitely would have thought it 100 years ago. But empathy is the one thing that can bring about a better society. So if books, if my interaction with books can help that, then that's cool. And equally, you know, when I get to what people are doing nowadays, if they can get empathy from that, that's crucial. And sometimes it can give you some moral questions. So some of the things I've read have brought up some sort of moral discussion, which has been brilliant. And that moral dilemma and developing your own sense of morality is also part of that idea of empathy, and that being developed with how much you read. So that's why I read, and I don't read to develop my vocabulary, so I know more words. I don't think that's necessarily part of being articulate. And you know, sometimes you can hear someone who's got fantastic vocabulary and loads of words, and is talking absolute bollocks. And you know, I see it a lot. You know, every day I see things on BookTube where this sort of lovely vocabulary is being spewed out, and what's being said is complete nonsense. So, you know, great vocabulary doesn't necessarily mean it's wiser or more interesting. So I think, you know, the idea that reading gets you a better vocabulary means that that's good up to a level, but I think most people get that kind of level of vocabulary from other things anyway, right? So I love books. I absolutely love books. I think that being born in 1971 means that I grew up with libraries around, with books around, secondhand bookstores everywhere. They were like really exciting things, and not only books but also magazines. So these are examples of things that I absolutely love, and I've got a couple of collections that I bought. I've talked before about my Twilight Zone magazines, and there was a time when I was in my late teens into my early 20s when I bought tons of magazines regularly. So I bought now and again I bought Cine Fantastique. I remember that. I bought Starlog. I bought what was it called? TV Zone, which was a sci-fi one about TV. I bought Mojo and Q and Empire, and I bought Sound and Vision sometimes, which was much more of an academic film magazine. I bought the Twilight Zone, obviously. I bought Mad Magazine when I could find it. But you know, I bought loads of magazines, and I loved them. Absolutely love magazines. But it's because I was born in 1971. They're not that essential. They're not that important. So I've gone on about how sad it is that magazines aren't sold anymore, and it's harder to find them. But is it really that sad? Do you know what I mean? I mean, the things that I love about magazines, the younger generation can find that in other places. And if you think about what's in this one, so this is a Mojo special about Kate Bush. So there's some great interviews. There's loads and loads of pictures. There's articles with some music critics talking about her career. An analysis of the Hounds of Love second side. Stuff about, I mean, it's all in order. So this is stuff about the Essential World album. This is a more comprehensive look at her songs in general. But you can find that on the internet. Does it have to be a magazine? Does it have to be something that's in this format? I don't know if it does have to be in this format. So I don't, I think it's quite an important point that the reason why I think it's sad that magazines aren't found anymore is because it's important to me. It's not important to the world. It's not going to really affect what information is out there, how available photos of these people that you like are, or interviews with these people, or an analysis of their output. You know, if you had, so say for example, I wanted to, like, not think about music. Let's look at science fiction, which, as you know, if you watch my channel, is a hugely important thing to me. If we looked at science fiction, and I wanted to look at a proper overview of Harlan Ellison's career, well, I couldn't find that in those days either, let alone now, and probably could find it now on the internet better. So you could argue that there is more available on the internet than there was in those days in magazines. I'm not sure. That's another. I'll have to do another video one day about the difference between what's available in second-hand shops and what's available digitally, because I know there's some books that I might never find except second-hand, and there's definitely some CDs and LPs, vinyl, that's not on Spotify. So there is a bit of a thing there. But, you know, the point is, I know that there might be some things lacking that you think, oh, magazines would have given me that, but not necessarily. And there are loads of things I would have wanted that I didn't ever find in magazines. But I do miss magazines because it's personal, because that's what I grew up with. And I love magazines, I think they're awesome. But the fact it's all gone online now is not necessarily shocking or worrying. So just a couple of other things I was going to mention in this sort of little bit. So when we were kids, if you look at how you got information, it was with encyclopedias a lot of the time. And now there's encyclopedic type things on the internet. I'm always trying to encourage my students to look further than Wikipedia, because there are other encyclopedias online and there are other breakdowns of things. But ultimately, a lot of the internet is written by the public, so you've got to be a little bit critical with that. But it is there. You know, there is an Encyclopedia Britannica website. You know, there is some formal, official, very ratified, if you like, information on the internet, but you've got to know which bits aren't really. But it's there. But when I was a kid, it was all about encyclopedias, and those encyclopedias were limited because they never got updated, or if a new edition came out, you wouldn't buy a new edition of an encyclopedia, you just had the one you had. And obviously internet websites can be changed all the time, so I think that's an interesting kind of thing to think about. And if you think about what video games I had when I was a kid, the most popular one when I was a little kid, so around that sort of age, a bit more than that, was Pong, which is a fantastic game, but clearly doesn't really develop your brain that well. And if you think about games nowadays, you know, if we're going to say that that young people today are kind of getting disadvantaged by what's available to them, the games now are far more complex. So their storylines are more complex. The moral dilemmas within the characters are more complex. The political situation could be discussed, and there could be some sort of political discourse in the games as well. And, you know, the interaction with the music of the game is also much more complex, because there's some really layered, interesting and groundbreaking music being written and recorded and put on these games as well. So there's all sorts of different ways that gaming has become an art form that goes well beyond some sort of time-wasting, time-killing thing that you had when you played Pong, something like that. So, or Frogger, or Joust, or whatever. You know, those are the games that I loved, but that's because of when I was born. And now, the games are far more sophisticated, far more interesting, far more complex, and far more better for developing these people. So, you know, open world games, you make decisions all the time. You know, if you think about Red Dead Redemption, when that came out, you were making decisions that the game would reward you for doing something honourable. And, you know, you've got those moral dilemmas all the way through the game. And that sort of storytelling, especially as it's so personal, because you are the person taking yourself through the story. So all those different things make it a very real development of your character, as in your own real life human character, as well as the character of the game. So I think that's a really interesting point. And also, if you're thinking about what people interact with now, so I mentioned my son earlier, who doesn't read a lot of books, but is endlessly curious, and he's an extremely intelligent and wise man, and he watches a lot of video essays from YouTubers, and I've watched some with him, and they are very sophisticated. They're as full of research that shows that this is not just watching someone do something on a whim, and it's much more useful for developing an argument or an opinion. And as such, he is extremely good at arguing a case, quite often very good at shedding light on something that is a new thing, because that's the other thing about where this has started, and some of the people that have talked about this in their videos have been from an older generation. So I love listening to people telling me about their own personal situation for me to get more empathy in what's happening with them, so that I can find out about these new terms or these new cultural changes, or dare I say it, these new pronouns. The more you find out, the more you can understand it, and the more you're not as freaked out by something new, because that is a thing that is definitely part of this cultural change. And because of the internet, the way it works, things are happening so quickly and people react quickly, which comes up to my next point actually, and that is that the one negative thing I think about all of this, because I think that everything I've said up to this point is positive, so I think these people making video essays on YouTube of all this research and trying to bring out some kind of understanding for the new cultural norms, I think that's brilliant. But one of the negative things is that because of the nature of the internet and the way that social media has changed things, people are now used to instant gratification, instant answers, instant reactions, and also a cascading instant reaction as well. So I think that can be very dangerous, it can be very negative, and if you look at the way Brexit was fought, it was very toxic and not very useful at all. So I hardly ever saw, literally hardly ever, I think once or twice, I saw a very nuanced, intelligent and mature argument about Brexit done on Facebook or YouTube or whatever. That's one of the negative things about the way that things have developed with the internet and social media and stuff. But all these other things should be seen as positive things, I think. And children are growing up politically aware. So I remember when I was a teenager, I was saying people aren't political enough, and now people are extremely political. It is true. One of the things that I was talking to my wife about, and she was saying something really good here, that they can be too focused on certain things that are kind of trending, so they may not be completely aware about every issue, or some stuff that's more localized, or some things that are more immediate. They might have certain things they feel really passionate about, and it could be because they're defending their friend or they're defending the new norm. So I think that's true, but it is interesting that kind of political awareness and that drive and that passion and that idea that they want to change things comes from an awareness, comes from a curiosity, comes from wanting to find out stuff, comes from the online sources, comes from YouTube. And literally, if there was this thing where people weren't reading anymore, people weren't worried about their vocabulary anymore, they weren't worried about empathy anymore, then there'd be a huge pandemic of apathy. And the one thing you can say about today is that, the world is divided, and it has got more polemically divided, I think, because of what I was saying about social media and the way things are argued. But everybody it seems to be everybody's driven, everybody's got an opinion, everybody's an expert, and that I think is one of the things about the new norm. So there's not really apathy, it's the opposite. Everybody's really passionate and driven and angry and defensive or offensive, however you want to see it. So I think that's an interesting change that has happened because of social media and the amount of information that's out there and the amount of curiosity and willingness to debate, willingness to be critical in this new generation. So I think that is ultimately the good side of the new norm. So the new norm does mean that argument is more difficult because it's so much more immediate and people are reacting very quickly and there's not as much nuance. But there's so much discussion, so much of a desire to be empathetic, and so much political discussion on everything that I think you know, these things, the culture and society is changing, but it's changing because of all these different people making their opinion known, rather than a small fraction of society making their opinion known. So I think that's interesting. So yeah, I've veered off into the political changes that have happened in the last 20 odd years because of the internet. But I think, yeah, when we talk about whether people are reading more or not, there's really two things we're talking about. It's the internet and the proliferation and addiction, if you like, of games. But the gaming thing, I think, is much more complex than people say, because, you know, we were addicted to TV. You know, we were addicted to different things. So we weren't these sort of masters of articulate reasoning anyway. So I think there's a little bit of rose-tinted glasses there as far as what we were like when we were teenagers or children or whatever. But I do think that if it is the case that young people are reading less books, and, you know, I've seen some evidence that could be true, if that is the case, then there are other ways that they are becoming very wise, articulate, critical thinkers with great vocabulary. So there we are. That's my opinion about all of this. And as a digital migrant, it's been interesting to kind of face this challenge of dealing with social media, while I watch the digital natives absolutely love it and dive in headfirst and get a lot out of it and get so educated from it and have so much fun with it. Thanks a lot for watching.